I realized after creating this slide that he looks a little intimidating. I don't, actually, is that even U.S. money? Who is that? Now that I'm looking at it, I was walking up, I thought, that is a very weird looking face. I don't know if I recognize that from any of our U.S. currency, but there he is. He's going to be looking at you for the rest of the evening. So just avert your eyes and you'll be good. Just real briefly, a lot of people have asked about, why am I wearing glasses? And well, I've always worn contacts. So since I was a little kid, I've needed contacts. I'm nearsighted, so seeing from afar has never been one of my strengths. I can look at things up close for a long time, but anyways, it's just funny how people always. I'm not that old yet, but you get these little insights of what it might be like, and people are telling me all the time about it. Yeah, and I realized the other day, at night, I have like a 15-minute stretching ritual that I have to go through to go to sleep. I thought, okay, so I didn't used to have to do that. And then I got the glasses, and the reason why was because my eyes were getting so dry in y'all's air. The West Texas air was drying out my eyes, so the contacts weren't allowing them to breathe. And so I got that, and then the first day I was wearing them, I was like, they're constantly sliding down my nose. And so I looked up some ways to fix this, and there's something called Nerd Wax that and so I was standing back there a minute ago, and I was like, I better get this out and put a little bit on my nose so it doesn't keep sliding down. And I thought, I have reached a new level of cool. I'm putting Nerd Wax on my glasses to keep them from slipping down my face as I as I step into the podium. So I feel very confident this evening, and I'd appreciate that you just bear with me. I also want to say just for a moment, before we look at some texts, I just want to give a thank you to this congregation and to everyone here. We're coming up on a year that we've been here. It's hard to believe that it's gone by very quickly for us, and there are so many of you who have been so encouraging to us, have received us so warmly. You've been encouraging in every way that you can imagine, from letters to phone calls to texts to kind words, and the best way to lift someone up is a word of encouragement, and there are so many here that do that. And so I just want to say thank you. You've been encouraging to me and to my whole family. Miranda loves it here. I love it here. My children, anytime we're going to church, they're truly giddy that they get to go to church and be a part of James's Bible time at the beginning and going to Bible class. And we always talk to them when we come home Sunday after church. What did you learn in class today? And they can always tell us, and we go through their materials with them. And there are so many good teachers here that are pouring into them, and we just feel very blessed. And so I just wanted to say thank you from my family for all of you and everything that you are doing here. This is a good place. I thought that, we've been in the Proverbs, and I thought that this would be a good dovetail for the discussion this morning, which is, let those who are poor boast in their great height, and let those who are rich boast in their lowness. And just this idea of how are we to view money and wealth and poverty even. And the Proverbs, the thing I love about the Proverbs is they're very earthy, not earthly. Like James talks about an earthly wisdom that is unspiritual and demonic. Not earthly, but the Proverbs are earthy. And what I mean is they get down to the ground level. And there are very practical things that are spoken of. The bottom line is you can't function in this world or in any world without money. It would be impossible. Even before currency was printed or was coined, currencies were, it was barter, it was trade, it was spices, it was salt, it was camels and goats, and and gold and jewels and those kinds of things. But man has always had a way for paying for his goods and to be paid for the goods that he provides. And so because of that, it's just a part of life. There's no getting away from it. And sometimes you'll hear someone say that money is the root of all evil. And of course, you've heard this, but this is not the truth. If money was the root of all evil, then we would all need to vow oaths of poverty and have nothing to do with it. But it is the love of money that is the root of all evil. It is when money is an idol. It is when it is a driving force that causes us to disobey God or to neglect spiritual duties. But money in itself is not a bad thing. It's actually a necessity. You can't get through life without it. And so because of that, the Proverbs give a lot of wisdom about it, and they speak directly to it. And so I want to have a few lessons that are speaking to some wisdom for wealth. So this will be the first one. And I don't know how much of this I'm going to get through tonight. My intention isn't to take up your whole evening. I just want to go through some basics. And really a good starting point. Now, this is, like I said, he's going to be looking at you for the whole time. So if you don't want to see him, get out your Bibles and join me. There's a great summary of wealth that's given in Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 to 9. And this, I think, gets at the heart of what Solomon, in all of his wisdom, would say concerning wealth. And perhaps this is a good place to be. He says this in Proverbs chapter 30, verses 8 through 9. He says, "Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God." What the proverb writer is getting at here is he's saying, God, don't give me so little that I can't function. And do not give me so much that it would be an idol for me. Don't give me so little that I would think about or be tempted to disobey your commands in order to acquire the things that I need for my family and for life. And don't give me so much that in having it, I would see it as an idol and I would worship it and I would maybe not even trust in you, not knowing it. Perhaps I would use your name and I would profess your name and I would attend worship services, but you would know and I wouldn't know that under the surface my trust really was in riches. And so there's kind of a middle ground there. And that there's no number put on this. You can't quantify it. You can't say, well, it's this much money. It's going to be different for every person. But I think that's a good prayer. God, give me what I need. And if anything is ever a hindrance for my spirit and for my salvation, remove it far from me. If there was a single thing in my world that would keep me from one day living in eternity with you, whatever it is, let it be crucified. Wouldn't we say that? When we get to eternal glory, wouldn't we say that? Wherever we are, say we're in a place of eternal punishment. Wouldn't we say in that place, God, I didn't need all of those things. If there was a thing that could have been removed from me that would allow me to focus rightly, I wish it would have been that way. And so we have opportunity now to say a prayer like this and to ask that the Lord would reveal to us where we have placed our trust. Now, having given that kind of preliminary thing, I just want to run through some basic tenets of the theology of wealth. And the first one, this is really the foundation for the whole discussion, and it is that all of the wealth in the entire universe belongs to God. It's all His. Psalm chapter 50 and verse 10 says, God says, I own the cattle on 1,000 hills. He's the maker of the universe. He He made everything. It's all His. He created it. He literally spoke gold into existence and diamonds. God owns everything. It's all His. And that's really where it begins, because then you get this idea that, okay, well, so I have it, and it's here, and so God's given it for a purpose. It belongs to Him, but there's a sense in which I'm merely a steward of it. And there are various ways in which that is going to affect me. So let me give some wisdom here from the Proverbs. Number one, it is that when you consider your life, there is something that should always and must always trump physical wealth, and it is wisdom. And this is especially important when we think about what will be my primary pursuit. So I will have money will be a part of my life, and I'm going to need to pursue it to some degree. I'm charged by God for working. The Proverbs are filled with this. Work. Look at the ant. Consider what the ant does. The ant goes out and works and labors and stores up, knowing that winter is coming and there won't be any more time at some point. So it's there, and it's a reality, but it is something that is inferior to wisdom. Wealth is inferior to wisdom. And so when we consider our primary focus in this life, if every day I must pursue after monetary gain in order to live and survive and provide and give an inheritance to my future children, then I must, to that degree, be seeking after the wisdom of God with a greater fervor and a greater hunger, recognizing one of these things is of eternal significance and the other is of temporal significance. One of these things I will need for all of my eternal existence. One of them I only need for a moment in these few days on this earth. And so we can't let those things be shifted. The temptation of the enemy would always be that we should focus so much on the physical things, and then what would be neglected in the process is the things of wisdom. And the reason why is the physical things are immediately before us. We see them. You feel the churning in your stomach. And you feel the thirst that needs to be quenched. And you feel with the elements, there is a need to have a roof over my head. And it's cold, there's a need for a blanket. And I must travel this great distance, there's a need for transportation. And so all of these things are there, and they're immediately before us. But there is a need that precedes them always. There is a need that if it is not met, then the physical things really mean very little. And so Solomon, we know the story when Solomon was asked by God, what would you have? What would you desire? I'll give it to you. Just imagine if the living God came to your face and said, what do you want? I'll give it to you. And Solomon said, I'm like a small child. I don't know my left hand from my right. I don't know how to go in or to go out. How can I be the king over these people? How can I lead? The thing that I want, the thing that I desire is wisdom. And of course, we know that God was greatly pleased by this response, wasn't He? God said, I will give you a wisdom unlike anyone has ever had. And then what was the result of it? What followed suit? Well, then he was blessed physically. Jesus said, seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. Let that be your primary pursuit. Always, no matter which walk of life you're in. And the other things will follow. But wealth is always inferior to wisdom. In Proverbs chapter 3, verses 13 to 14, it said, blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding, for the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and no thing you desire can compare with her. Nothing. What is in the right hand of wisdom? Well, long life. Long life is in her right hand. What good is monetary gain if you only live to be 20? I look at some of those rappers from the 90s, You remember the hip hop kind of started a bit earlier than that, but some of those rappers, if you listen to some of the things they're talking about is money, drugs, and sex, and that's just what they're blasting. I don't advise it. I don't advise that you go listen to it, but you see them pursuing after it to the degree, and a lot of those guys, they died in the 90s. They died when they were 20 years old. They died when they were 21. They had all of these things, but because of the way they lived, they didn't even get to see a life that would spend it. And the Proverbs are filled with this admonition that long life is the product of wisdom. Money can't buy long life. It can't. Proverbs chapter 8, verses 10 through 11 reads like this: "Take my instruction instead of silver." Now, this is wisdom speaking. Wisdom saying this. "Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her." It's been said that the Proverbs is a training manual for a king. And what is the focus of this person who will one day be king and will certainly have all of these resources and will be put into this position of influence? The thing he needs more than anything is wisdom. Take a person of wisdom over a person of wealth any day. And the Proverbs speak to this repeatedly. Chapter 15 and verse 16. It says, "Better is a little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble with it. Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a fattened ox and hatred with it." You remember that scene from the movie about Scrooge. I'm blanking on what it's called. Christmas Story? No, Christmas, that's different. The Christmas Carol. You remember that scene where little Timmy, he's sick and he's in his home, and this family, they're just barely scraping by. I mean, to get food on the table in the first place was a miracle. And they're gathered around, and you hear them in there laughing, and the kids are running around, and there's just this picture of joy around these meager portions. And they did not have much, and then the contrast of it was Scrooge, who was pinching his pennies, literally, and he was just a miserable person. The Proverbs are saying one of these things is worthwhile. One of these things is better than the other. That's what he's saying. Better is just a little with the fear of the Lord than to have an abundance and not to know your God. And so wisdom should be pursued at. I hope this is clear. If wisdom is this much more important than physical wealth, then we should be hungering after it, pursuing after it. When you rise up, God, give me wisdom. Please give me wisdom. Help me know how to speak with this person. Help me know how to conduct myself at work. Let me know how to lead my family. What blind spots exist that I'm not aware of, or perhaps that I have put out of my attention? Make me aware of them, because I want to have wisdom. I want long life. I want eternal life. And so wealth is always inferior to wisdom. Chapter 16 and verse 8, it says, "Better is a little with righteousness than great revenues with injustice." Chapter 16 and verse 16, "How much better to get wisdom than gold? To get understanding is to be chosen rather than silver." This thing is just, it's repeated over and over again. Chapter 22 and verse 1. And this is just a sampling. "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold." You look over your life and you think about the times of greatest joy. What were they? How many of your greatest and most important memories are attached to a physical thing? I think about when I was a child and Christmas is coming around, and you are so excited for the day, you can't wait for Christmas morning to open up the presents. And, looking back now, I remember maybe one or two of the physical presents that I ever received. But I remember the meals around the table. I remember the traditions on Christmas Eve. I remember the sound of Christmas music and me and my 4 sisters decorating the Christmas tree. I remember the love that was there between my parents as we were brought up under them. I look back and I remember those things far more than I remember any of the physical things. What are the things that we know have value and the other things which are ultimately inferior? So I say once again that wealth must always be pursued secondarily to wisdom, and it will be a result of it. You see this repeated through the Proverbs. It will be a result of it. And then once you've acquired wisdom, this thing which is of utmost importance, then with the acquisition of wealth, I now know here's how to handle this in a God-honoring, righteous way, in a way that will not allow me to fall into these behaviors of the world who knows not God. And there, with the acquisition of wealth, then, I know not how to manage it. I know how to steward it. I know how to use it for, ultimately, the glory of God. Now, there are some, and this is it's a demonic idea that came about very early, and I think this is an ancient idea, but it's the idea of asceticism, and that God doesn't want you to enjoy life. He doesn't want you to have pleasure. He wants for you to be just this sober, stoic, who feeds himself with saltine crackers and water for every meal, and sleeps on a stone for his bed. And that's a holy person, is this person who never has any pleasure at all. That is a complete misunderstanding of the world God made. It's a complete misunderstanding of the Creator who loves us and desires for us to have pleasure. God does not give rules and requirements for us and laws that we would then miss out on pleasure. He gives those things so that we would have the greatest of all pleasure. I see nowhere in any of the biblical literature where the people, as a result of following God, were less joyful to their core than had they gone on their merry way without God. To the contrary, Paul says, everything that I once saw as the most important was rubbish in comparison to what it is that God provides. But God has made us a world with rich colors. He didn't make it black and white. He made it with so many different kinds of fruit. When I was in California recently, I ate this fruit that they had that was a mixture between, now, I don't know I can't even remember the name of it, but it was like a mixture between a tomato and a kiwi is the best way I can describe it. I'd never seen anything like it, had never tasted anything quite like it. I thought it was great. And when we lived in the Caribbean, there's just this huge amount of fruits that you just can't even imagine, and vegetables and spices and variations, and God has created a world in which those things are there, and He gave the human tongue in order to decipher and taste those things. And why did He do this? Why didn't He make everything taste like water? God desires that we would enjoy life. God created sex, and that's something we don't really talk about a whole lot in church, but God created it, and He made it not just for procreation. That is a big part of it, but God made it to be good and to be enjoyed in a certain environment where there really is pleasure that comes with it. God created this. God did this. God does desire that we have life, and one of the realities of money is that God would have us not just to live meagerly, but to be able to have an abundant life. God does desire that we have a life that has pleasures and joys and memories that are made, and He gives us wealth as one way of carrying this out. In Proverbs chapter 3, the result, we just read this a moment ago, but verse 16, long life is in her right hand, in her left hand are riches and honor. This is given to us by God. Chapter 8 and verse 18, riches and honor are with me, enduring wealth and righteousness. Now again, this is not the primary pursuit, but it is the result of those who pursue after wisdom primarily. Again, this is what was said to Solomon, who said, God, my primary venture in this life is going to be wisdom. That's what I desire more than anything. And what did God, the Father, give to him as a result? He gave him great wealth. God does desire that we enjoy the life that we lead. Verse 20, I walk in the way of righteousness, in the paths of justice, granting an inheritance to those who love me, and filling their treasuries. God does this. He gives an inheritance, and he fills the treasuries of those who pursue wisdom as a primary means. So God does this. And the reality is this: there are good uses for wealth. One of them being that God would have us to live lives that do have joy, where we can experience good foods and experience beautiful places if he permits. But there are so many other blessings that come from it. One of the blessings is given in chapter 13 and verse 22. Chapter 13 and verse 22, it says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. What ought to be a focus in the acquisition of money is not, I heard somebody one time say, my intention in this world is to spend every last penny that I have, so that when I die, every bit of it has been spent. He said, I'm not giving anything to any of my children, that I'm going to spend it all on me. And I thought, what a terrible, unchristian perspective. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. That's grandchildren. That's third generation. And the idea there is, I'm not just amassing this for me. I'm saving up not just for a rainy day. I'm saving up not just for when terror comes. I'm saving up to bless my grandchildren. I want to one day help perhaps pay for their schooling, or help them get their first car, or allow them to have a parcel of land, something to get off the ground when they begin. And this is what the Proverbs say. You can't, without wealth, you can't do what he's saying to do here. But this is a good use for it. Another one, and you might find this a bit ironic and surprising, but again, the Proverbs often surprise us. Money can be used to make friends. Now, everyone's looking at me like, whoa, that's Daniel, you're way off your rocker. Let me just read this to you. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 20. The poor is disliked even by his neighbor, but the rich has many friends. Now, I will grant it that he is speaking simply to a reality here. He's not commenting necessarily whether this is good or bad. And I would say that if a person was pursuing after someone simply because of the money that they had, that's not a friend worth having in the first place. But it is a reality. And so I wonder, can that be used? Can that be used to some good end? Well, I think that it can, and I'll show you here in just a moment. But I want you to see also chapter 19 and verse 6. Chapter 19 and verse 6, it says, many seek the favor of a generous man, and everyone is a friend to a man who gives gifts. People are looking for the immediate need first. They're looking for food and water and some measure of attention in some physical way. And it seems to me that there was a person who lived and walked on this earth who gave us an example and a pattern that we perhaps could follow after, maybe one after whose name we bear, who lived a life like this, who would meet an immediate physical need to draw attention to something that was of eternal significance. And of course, I'm talking about Jesus. This is modeled all through his ministry, that he would meet a need in order to get the attention for the ultimate need. Jesus, in fact, spoke a parable, and this is as far as I'm going tonight. I have so much more on my notes. I want this to be a few weeks of lessons for us to digest this, but I want you to see what Jesus says. Turn in your Bibles, because I want you to see that Jesus said this. Daniel didn't say it. This is Jesus, and he said something really amazing. Go to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 16. I miss the days before cell phones when you could, when the preacher said, turn to the Bible verse, and you heard that just like a wave across the auditorium. Now it's just silent buttons being pressed. But as long as you're there, Luke chapter 16, and I want you to see what Jesus says here. Verse 1, he said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in your account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. The manager said to him, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do so that when I am removed from my management, people may receive me into their houses. So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. Now this first story is the kind of story that would get somebody landed in prison if this was to be monitored or if this was to be pursued after in a civil case. But the point Jesus is making is not, hey, we should do that. We should be dishonest. Jesus says this guy was dishonest, but I want you to recognize what it was that this man was trying to do. This man was using some measure that dealt with money in order to acquire for himself friends, because he knew when I'm thrown out of my management, I'm going to need a place to stay. And who better than this person who I helped out? I took their bill and I dishonestly marked it out and said, oh, he only owed 50. He didn't owe 100. He only owed 50. And the person who owed it is going to say, now I owe you. But look at what Jesus says. He was shrewd. He was dishonest, but he was shrewd. Jesus, earlier in his ministry, he says, be as shrewd as a serpent, but as innocent as a dove. So you don't want to just be shrewd like a snake is. You want to be as innocent as a dove as well. But notice what Jesus says. He says, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. He's saying people, corporations, businesses, they develop schemes. They get together and they have plots to say, how can we gain the favor of the public? How can we gain the attention? And they put hours and hours and hours and hours into it in order to gain and acquire physical wealth and those kinds of things. But Jesus says, look at them and their shrewdness and their tactics and the time they put into it. And Jesus says, and I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you've not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? What's Jesus saying? Use those resources. Use the things God has given, even the physical things, to gain the attention of the world. But do not use it in an unrighteous way or a dishonest way or the way of a business corporation that seeks to ultimately ruin a people that purchases from them. Do it in such a way so as to make eternal friends. He says, if you will do this, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings. In other words, you have used it somehow, unrighteous wealth, you've used it somehow in order to show people the true need, which is Jesus the Christ. There's a lot of ways to do that, and we're going to need wisdom in order to make it happen. So that's all that I have for tonight. I've got more good uses for it. We're going to speak to the danger of it, and then we're going to spend some time looking at just very practical, what can you do right now? I'm going to talk to the young. What can you do right now to prep yourself and get yourself set up for the future? And even those that are perhaps in debt, what we can do moving forward. All of this right from the Word of God. If you have any need at all, if you need to give your life to Jesus, there's an opportunity to let that be known while we stand and while we sing.